All right, folks, I think we can get started this evening. Open your Bibles to page 1. We are studying Genesis. The only page number in all of our Bibles that probably going to be the same. I have some preliminary things to say before we get into the material. And much like the author, well, no, actually opposite of the author. There's a lot to be said about the early chapters and verses, especially in chapter 1. And then we'll kind of slow down, whereas Moses kind of barrel races through the opening chapters and then slows down. So it's a little bit different the way we're going to break it down, because there's so much to unpack from these opening chapters, especially in the first chapter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Preliminary thoughts about Genesis. Genesis is ancient history. But it's not in the way that we use that word today. We say something is ancient history, we say that derogatorily. Genesis is not antiquated. It is not unneeded. It is not expired in its purpose or in its value. It is ancient, it is history, but it remains abundant with insight. It gives you all that you, well, not all that you know, you need the other 65 for that, but it gives you a foundation on which to build an understanding of the work of God, the nature of man, and the promise of salvation. It is a very, very old book, and the things that it concerns are even older than the writing of it, to the point of, in the beginning, is the opening words. The book is valuable in that sense, not just as a historical document, but as a chronicle of events that teach the same timeless lesson that you find in the other 65 books, which is faith in God leads to reward. That trusting in God will never let you down. That following God will always result in blessings that come, if not immediately, then almost certainly, eventually. Faith and obedience have and always have been the avenue by which people are made right in the sight of God. In Genesis, in the very first book of your Bible, Moses lays that down as a fundamental truth. And he makes that the foundation on which the whole rest of the Bible, of which he only writes 4 more books, is built. You cannot study the Old Testament without studying Genesis. You can't study your Bible without studying the Old Testament. And so you should not be calling yourself a Bible student without having taken a deep dive into this book. This is one of the most popular books to study in Bible classes. Usually it is studied, in the prescribed scriptural 13-week chunk. And so you get kind of an overview of it. I'm not going to spend my time knocking that. That's not why we're here. But rather, this class is different from that. We are not looking at an overview of Genesis. We are not talking about Genesis. We are going to just draw from all of Genesis, whatever it is we can find to say. I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that go unsaid, but we are going to try to leave no stone unturned, if by stone you mean a verse. So that means we'll be here for a while. I hope, God willing, to complete the first 11 chapters, which is basically the intro of Genesis, by the end of the quarter, which is around Thanksgiving time. And then after that, we'll just go on and see what happens. The author is Moses, a fact for which the whole rest of the Bible gives you ample evidence. Jesus quotes from this book and cites Moses as its author, Matthew 19. Like all the rest of the Pentateuch, it is accepted by Jews from the beginning as being penned by Moses, and they would know since they were there when he wrote the thing and handed it to them after the Exodus and before the entrance into Canaan's land. You have citations from the 5 books of Moses, as we call them. It's just one big giant scroll to the Jews, but the 5 books of Moses, we call them. They pop up throughout the New Testament, and they are all to a one attributed to Moses. Jews observed laws and statutes, and they recognized the history that is recorded here in this book as coming from Moses. When Jesus talks about the various things written in what we call the Old Testament that predicted his death, burial, and resurrection, he quotes from 3 broad sources: the Psalms, the prophets, and the words of Moses. There is no dispute among any unbiased observer or scholar that Moses is the historian who pens the words of Genesis. Genesis is called Genesis because the word Genesis means the start of something, the beginning of something. In the LXX, which is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that Jesus used in his day, the book is called in the Hebrew Bereshit, which means in the beginning, and so the LXX is the same thing. In the beginning is the name of it. Genesis, same idea. The book records the beginning of the material universe, the start of life on earth, the onset of marriage between man and woman, the first fruits of human culture, the initial spread of humanity, and the division of humanity by way of race and language and culture. Genesis also records the first time man was tempted, the first time man sinned, and the first actions to save man undertaken not by man but by the God man had sinned against. Moses devotes only one chapter, chapter 1, to the broad creation account. And then another chapter kind of zeroes in on that creation to focus on humanity in particular and the garden in which man is placed. Then chapter 3 focuses on the fall of man and our expulsion from the garden. And after that, Moses picks up the speed. And he takes us in the space of 2 chapters from humanity's first steps out of Eden to the days of Noah, which according to the genealogical record is over 1,000 years of history. And he gives you 3 chapters devoted to the flood account, chapters 9, 10, and 11, which is easily the most pivotal and foundational and earth-shattering and monumental event in human history up until the birth of our Master. But the flood account, as we'll get to when we get to it, is not just history. It is not the foundation for so many things we can understand about the world and the way the world is, but it is also allegory. It's also a teaching tool to show us, on the one hand, the goodness of God, he spares Noah and his family, and the severity of God, he spares none other. The retributive nature of God to punish those who sin, and the gracious nature of God to save those who are faithfully obedient. Again, that theme throughout the whole Old Testament. Faithful obedience leads to righteousness. After the flood, you have 3 chapters that segue to the calling of Abraham, and once that happens, Moses hits the brakes and zooms all the way in to focus on this one person, Abraham, and the family that came from him. Everything from creation to the call of Abraham, which is basically chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis, is this 1,700-year period of time in human history. And Moses only devotes 1/5 of the book to it, 20%. The last 4/5 of Genesis cover only about 200 years of history, and that's 80% of the book. Why does the author, Moses, not devote more time to the establishment of various cultures and nations after the Tower of Babel incident, which we'll get in chapter 11? Why does he not focus more on the details of man's time in the garden? Why doesn't he answer all of our little nagging questions that we have when we read that? I mean, for crying out loud, in chapter 1, verse 16, he just tosses out as just a flippant little afterthought, oh yeah, God made the stars too. But I mean, have you looked outside at night? There's a lot of them. He doesn't devote any time to that. He just says, by the way, yeah, he did those too. Why doesn't he give us more information? Because Genesis' purpose as a book is not to chronicle the deeds of the Creator and the Maker of the universe. It's not to catalog every step of humanity's journey from a single husband and wife post-Eden to a world that is overflowing with civilizations and nations and cultures. Genesis' purpose is quickly to take us from the beginning of everything, as fast as you can get there without skipping any important details, all the way to Israel goes into Egypt, or Joseph goes into Egypt and the nation follows. That is Genesis' point. Genesis is written to a particular group of people who are already an established nation, who have an oral tradition of their history, who have passed around the stories of their ancestry. And Moses comes in, leads them out of Egypt, gives them the law at Sinai, is leading them to the promised land, wandering for 40 years along the way, but that's a different book. And then before sending them off and dying on Mount Nebo, he says, here is the written record of everything you've been telling each other at campsite stories. Here's the written, authoritative, definitive edition of your history, Israel, your history. This is Moses' definitive take on the history of the people of God. It just so happens that includes the history of everything, because you got to make everything before you can make the people of God. Think about it like this. Imagine being an American and you have no access to history books. They were never written. All we have is just stuff that's passed around. History happened, and people talk about other things that happened, and so we share stories and we pass legends and we pass stories down from father to son and so forth. We might have heard stories about the Mayflower, about Plymouth Rock, about Columbus, about Vespucci, or about Washington, or someone like that. You might have heard those stories, but without a written definitive account, you're not going to know what really happened. But then you crack open a book that is definitive, authoritative, and written to be preserved. Now you've got history. Genesis is history. Chapter 1. back in July, before we get to verse 1, back in July, David Reese is here. So I'm going to embarrass him just a little bit, not much. He was teaching Genesis 1 in the VBS class. Did a tremendous job. And I jotted down notes, as I often do when I'm not teaching. I'm writing something else I'm going to teach. And so I was listening to David teach, and maybe if you were sitting behind me, you saw me grab my phone and start typing. I was not texting somebody. I was not doom scrolling or anything. I was writing what I usually do. I was quickly writing down notes of something that I thought of. So I wrote down some things, and this is what I wrote down based on what David was saying. So this might be some plagiarism, but a lot of it is mine. Genesis is Moses' message to a recently freed people, reframing their identity. No longer are they a people whose existence is defined by how many bricks they can make for Pharaoh. That was David's great point. But now they are a chosen people. They are in the center of God's mind. They are in the center of the proverbial world, in the center of the proverbial universe. To go back to the ancient Copernican debate. Okay, you all know the answer to this. Don't overthink it. Is the Earth in the center of the solar system? No, it is not. And that was the big debate we had many years ago. We've moved past that, is the hope we have. But is the Earth in the center of the universe? You cannot see the edges of the universe. You cannot see its boundaries like we can see the boundaries of the solar system. So we can know there's a sun. It's a solar system, not an earthen system. So we can see the sun, and we can see the things orbiting around it. So we can see the edges, so we can see the whole of it. But you can't see the boundaries of the universe. So you can't know by a telescope or by a probe or something like that to know what is the center of the universe. But you have a Bible that tells you, in the beginning, God did not make stars and planets and galaxies and nebulas and then pick one that he liked and decide this is the one. But rather, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. God made a place for people. In the beginning, God made a place for people. In the beginning, the maker of everything first made a place to put you, and then made everything else around it, which is the whole rest of Genesis chapter 1. So yes, in a sense, no, Earth is not the center of the solar system, but Earth, this world, this place in which we live and have a relationship with God or lack thereof, is the center of the universe, because God is the maker of the universe, and he created the boundary of it. And he focused in on us and put us in that center. Moses, again, is message to a recently freed people coming to terms with this new existence post-Exodus. Genesis is the beginning of matter and the material world. But Genesis 1, the point is to say you matter. God made all this for you. That's why Moses races from creation to Abraham and then hits the brakes and takes his time. Because the point of Genesis is not to explore the scientific nature of the universe. It's to give Israel their history, which includes the history of all things. So, to summarize, Israel's history is not part of the creation story. The creation story is part of Israel's history. Keep that in your mind. Genesis 1:1. Disclaimer. Listen, we're only going to get to like 6 verses today, but don't worry. I baked that in, okay? Disclaimer. Genesis is not a science book. It is not a science text. But, God invented science. God invented gravity and thermodynamics and the speed of light. So the two are not mutually exclusive. I know not everybody in here is going to geek out about nerd science stuff. I understand that. I respect that. And I will try to respect that enough not to force you to have to listen to all that. If you don't like any of that kind of stuff, just be in awe with me at the creator of the universe. Be a psalmist in mindset and just look up at the stars, be amazed, and just say how wonderful and amazing he is. All right. The rest of us, we can geek out about some of this. Chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The opening of Genesis. It is so well known. It is so ubiquitous. It's up there with John 3:16, and maybe that's it. There's probably not another comparison in terms of a verse that every single human being on planet Earth knows in their native tongue, if not also in the King James language, which is its own language sometimes. It is so well known. We could spend an entire quarter just breaking down the ramifications of this verse and the chapter that follows it, and that's it. And I'm sure there are many classes that do just that, and hundreds of books that have been written to do just that. But let's try to keep moving ahead. The question to consider is, what is Moses telling us here? What is the point of writing what he writes? It's a curious opening. Moses does not start the first book of inspiration. He is moved by the Holy Spirit of God to put proverbial pen to paper and write something, and he doesn't open with, God spoke to me, here's who God is. Why? Well, because again, he's writing to a people who already know God. They've already met God. They've already seen the miracles of God. They don't need to be convinced there is a God. They have heard his voice. So Moses doesn't have to open with that. We would prefer him to do so, but Genesis was not written specifically for us. We're deriving things from it, but there's that. Moses does not give you this detailed, evidence-based argument for the existence of God. He doesn't break down the cosmological argument for a creator. He doesn't say, look, it's impossible for something that is to have just spontaneously come into being. There must have been something that caused it to be. There must be a cause for this effect of the universe to exist. Nothing cannot make something. He doesn't open with that. He starts with the God who has always been making us. He starts with the beginning of time. In the beginning. As early as you could record anything in a temporal way. Beginning. God was already there and made the heavens and the earth. God is eternal. So why, to answer the previous question, why doesn't Moses begin with the beginning of God? That question is nonsensical. How would you start with a being that has no start? He who was in the beginning did not begin when the beginning began. So Moses starts with the beginning of anything that could begin. In the beginning, God created. God does not find us and claim us. God made us. And there are many ways for us today to create things. A person can chop down a tree and create a log cabin. A person can shape clay and make a bowl. A person can melt oil and make a plastic fork. There are many ways for nature to create things. Glacial deposits at the tops of mountains slowly start to melt and they trickle, and trickles form into streams, and streams form into rivers that flow out of mountains down into oceans and so forth. You can have water particles in the atmosphere that refract the sunlight and they create this beautiful rainbow after spring rain. A bolt of lightning can strike the sandy beach and create this beautiful sculptural looking ornament thing called a fulgurite. Nature created these things. Okay, but where did trees come from? Who made the clay? Who created the oil? Who carved the mountains? Who turned on the sunlight? Who scattered the sand? Before the beginning, there was nothing but God. And in the beginning, God created. God made. What did he create? Moses says, the heavens and the earth. In other words, to put it in simple terms, everything that is around us and below us and everything that is around us and above us. The heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God made everything around us and above us. But where did all that come from? We live in a world of cause and effect. That is a basic law of science. Again, Genesis was not written to be a scientific book, but I'm just going to inject a little bit here because why couldn't I? Science is not in opposition to God. Science is about understanding the natural things that are. This universe is. It are. This universe is. It works. It has features and mechanics and laws that govern it. And we have observed some of them. Who knows, if there's another 1,000 years, we might observe new laws. The way Newton formulated and observed and helped us rationalize a law of gravity, right? Or the way Newton formulated and observed and rationalized a law of calculus and things like that. The things that we use to help shape, like measuring sticks, of the way we come to understand the world around us. Those ancient scientists, Copernicus and Galileo and all the Arabic scientists who invented things like algebra and things, all of them approach science from the same standpoint, which is there is a God. They all understood the universe has laws that govern it because they believed in a law giver. They believed in a lawmaker, some standard setter. So God in the beginning made the order of things. God in the beginning made the measuring sticks of things, the heaven and the earth and all that governs them. Things do not just happen. There's always an instigator. There's always someone or something that moves, someone or something that causes something to happen. This universe is governed. It stands to reason there's a governor. So where do the heavens and the earth come from? Before there was anything, what was there to cause anything to happen? In the beginning, God created. Well then, the natural question, then where did God come from? And Moses does not even spend a minute explaining this. His focus is on us, by the way, not on God. But the answer, I think, is obvious. And I think Moses says enough in this chapter to help us understand that nagging question people sometimes have, which is, where did God come from? Who created God? God created everything. In a minute, Moses is going to tell us that God speaks light into existence, and light is the universal measuring stick of time. And I think it's an ancient way of telling us, even without Moses realizing it, that God invented time, that God made time. Therefore, before God made it, there was no time. And since God was around to make it, God exists beyond the impositions of it. God is timeless. God is eternal. There is therefore no reason to ask, where did God come from, or when was God made? The question is illogical. It's nonsensical, because God made everything, which means before God made anything, there was nothing. And in fact, that's Bible. That's John 1. God is a spirit, and so did not come from anywhere. And that spirit God made a natural universe. This God who has always been created what now is. So in conclusion, there's no reason to ask, when was God made? Because God made time. He existed before the measurement of time was possible. When were you made? I was made 41 years ago in a few weeks. You can measure that because time has passed 41 years and a few days since then. It is not so with God. God has always been, and therefore he was already here to begin time when time began. Okay? That's verse 1. We'll pick up the pace. Verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Immediately after God speaks the earth into existence, Moses tells you the earth that has now been spoken into existence, part of the heavens and the earth that is made, it is without form and void. In other words, featureless, unbeautiful, undesigned, but to be designed. It is a blank slate on which the painter will paint his masterpiece. Why didn't God just make it all at once? We're going to read as we go through this that he's going to take 6 days and then rest on the seventh day. Why not just knock it all out in one utterance? I'm going to give you the answer. Are you ready? He didn't want to. That's the answer. And if there was a different answer, I would have it, but it's not here. I know the temptation is to read this backwards, to read your Bible backwards and say, okay, well in Exodus, and Moses is in this Exodus time period when he writes Genesis, in Exodus, God is going to establish the law of the Sabbath, and he's going to inscribe that into law in Exodus 20, but even before that, they were observing the Sabbath in a limited way. So you have in Exodus the giving of the Sabbath day of rest, the seventh day, and 6 days of work and 7 days of rest. And for Moses to help the people grasp the meaning of that, Moses writes the creation as a 6-day event with the seventh day of rest. Okay, that's backwards. That's backwards. Do not be so obsessed with trying to understand naturally the way things are that you lose the supernatural. Do not lose the wonder of the power of God in trying to understand God, which is a danger a lot of people get into, is that I want to understand this, I want to make sense of this, I want to rationalize this, and so they strip away all the supernatural. They try to just find a natural explanation for everything in the Bible. Don't do that. You are made by a wondrous being, a God who performs wonders as naturally as you pick up a pencil and write your name. God did this thing. And God chose to do this thing over the course of 6 days. I will concede. In fact, it'd be better to look at it this way. Instead of looking at it backwards, look at it this way. Doesn't it make more sense for the God of foreknowledge to foresee that in the future he is going to establish a day of rest for his people and give them 6 days to work and a seventh day off? And so to help establish that, he uses that in his own creation account. He pre-builds in the notion of a 6-day work week and a 7th-day rest in the creation version of events that Moses transcribes. I think that's the better way to look at it than to look at it backwards. The earth is made in the beginning, and then God adds on to it. He's going to take 6 days, and then he's going to rest. Here's another thing to think about. In establishing the 7th day of rest, which is coming, it's the end of the chapter, but we're laying out an overview. In establishing 6 days of work and a 7th day in which God rests, Moses is showing you that God is creating a calendar, that God is creating a week. God is creating, just like later, he's going to create the sun and the moon. He's going to create the orbit and the axis of the earth, and all these things are all going to start working in beautiful harmony, and through them, the spinning of the earth on its axis is going to establish a day. The revolution of the earth around the sun is going to establish a year. The spin of the moon around the earth is going to establish essentially a month. But what is there to establish a week? What stellar phenomena or what celestial body or what movement of the planetary system creates the week for us? There is not one. The week is seemingly an entirely arbitrary thing God makes and makes and makes all through 6 days. And then on the 7th day, God rests. What is the day after the rest day? Is it the 8th day? I guess it kind of is. But what is it really? The first day of the week. Right, it's the first day of the week. But who established that? Who created it? Where did that come from? Like you can see, you can track scientifically days progressing through the creation account. The evening and the morning were the first, second, third day. And then, eventually, later on, as Genesis starts to expand its narrative, years pass. Earth spins around the sun. But a week is being invented here before your eyes by God. And he's doing so for the same reason one of the reasons he gives you a sun and a moon, to create a calendar. And Moses is the writer here. He's writing these things to a people who have to keep a calendar, to keep the various feasts and festivals in line. So this is all seen in the foreknowledge of God. He's perceiving things and the purpose for things long even before they would ever be in use. Moses says in this verse also that the earth is without form and void, and the Spirit of God moves over the face of the waters, or the deep, your Bible might say. In other words, the earth had something when it was made. It was just a big ball of water. There were no land masses and no mountains and no valleys and things like that, no grassland. That's coming later in the creation week. What you have in the beginning, when God makes the earth, is he makes a world that is completely encased in water. Remember that. In 5 chapters, you're going to see it again. But it starts here. That's the picture of it. Something else you learn, by the way. The text says the earth is basically a big ball of water, and the Spirit of God moves, broods, literally, over the face of the deep. Job 26:13 says God garnished the heavens in the creation. The Spirit of God garnished the heavens in the creation. The point here is that God is not just spirit. God is not just a spirit. God also has a spirit. The Spirit of God moves over the face of the waters. God, as will become more clear as you go through the whole rest of the Bible, is a fellowship within himself. 3 within 1. We call them Father, Son, and Spirit, but that's the idea. 1, 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. You did not have, and God said, "Let there be a heavens and the earth." Moses treats that almost like a preamble. In the beginning, when God is making the heavens and the earth, God said, "Let there be light." Now it begins. Now the utterances of creation, as the Jews describe it, begin. This is the first utterance of creation. Let there be light. And there was light. Now, I think it's in November. I have a sermon I'm going to preach about light. It's going to be a little bit of Genesis, a little bit of Exodus, a little bit of Jesus. So I'm going to repeat myself. Try to forget between now and November, okay? It was Einstein who coined the phrase about light, that it is the universe's speed limit. The speed of light is insurmountable, 186,000 miles per second. The speed of light is the speed at which time itself travels, as we can reckon it. You can get in a car and you can go 55 miles an hour, or you might go out for a walk and walk 10 miles an hour, but your car and your walk are both traveling relative to the speed of light. That's Einstein. You could try to move faster and faster to inch up closer to that limit of 186,000 miles per hour, but you will never reach it because E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times acceleration. In other words, the faster you accelerate, the more your mass increases, which slows you down, so you need more propellant, which increases your mass, you need more propellant. It creates this cycle where you can never be light enough to travel fast enough to get up to that speed limit, that barrier at which light itself moves, 186,000 miles per second. We cannot do that because we are finite. In the beginning, an infinite being just spoke it into being and just said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And in so doing, he governed the natural world, not just the planet, but the natural universe with this speed limit. He imposes it here at the beginning. Before he even makes the sun, which produces light, or stars, which produce light, he made light itself. Verse 4. And God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. How did God divide the light from the darkness? Moses has not told us yet, and even when he does, it's going to be nothing more than that. Sun goes down, that's darkness. Sun comes up, that's day. But keep in mind, again, Moses is not writing a scientific journal. He's penning what will be a history book for the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's going to be poetic with his details. He's going to be robust in certain areas and very vague in other areas. He's essentially just teaching you humongous things and speed running you to. And then there was a man named Abraham. But he makes light. He divides light from darkness. Again, you'll get that how he does that in a minute. But the point is, he sees all this and he says, it is good. And he divides the light from the darkness. Verse 5. He calls the light day. This is the division of it. He calls the light day, and the darkness he calls night, and the evening and the morning, night and day, were the first day. God is not just maker, as you see in these first couple chapters. He's also namer. He calls the light day. Why does he call it day? He called the darkness night, and that's why we call it night. Simple things. So simple you take them for granted. Why do we call this day? I know obviously that's our language. The Hebrews have yom and other words for day. But why do we call this day? Why do we call that night? Why do we have a word for it? Because in the beginning, God gave these things names. We're not even here yet. He's creating these things. He's beautifying them. He's saying they're good. He's giving them their names. Why wouldn't he care to name these things that he's made? All through the Bible, he's naming things left and right. Verse 6. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. This is the second utterance of creation. For there to be a separation in the middle of the waters, resulting in what is something above and below waters. And the space in between is called the firmament. Sometimes it's translated as vault or expanse, something like that. It's important to remember, the whole world that Moses is describing here is going to look very different from the world that we see around us today. Because we are reading here pre-flood. And the flood is the great choke point of history, a fact which will become apparent as we go through this book. You have all of chapters 1 through, let's say, 6 through 9, and then everything 6 through 9 plus. And well, this I guess is 6 through 9. There, chapters 1 through 5. There, here you go. A world from Genesis chapter 1 through 5, and the world chapter 10 to the present, and in between, a whole lot of stuff went down. And this is the flood. This is chapter 6 through 9. And this changes everything. And so many assumptions that we have and things we try to read into this text based on the world that we see around us, we do wrong. We commit an error there because we forget that the world here, as Peter puts it, the world that then was, perished. And therefore a new world has come into being and has been in being since post-flood. The flood completely changes everything. That's why it serves not just as history, but as beautiful allegory to salvation and changing everything. But that's for chapters 6 through 9. Here, what you have is God taking this world that, as we established in the beginning, is just a... Why? If they don't work, throw them away. You have this world of water. And I'm not going to be able to do this in 2 dimensions, but let's do our best. You have this world that is just covered in water, and then God separates the water from the water. So that there's water, and then there's no water, and then there's water. And it's this hard thing for us to wrap our minds around because we go outside and we look up and it's just space, the final frontier. And it's just the sky. It's blue, but it's not because it's water. It's blue because the light, the particles in the atmosphere reflect the sunlight. That's why it changes to orange and red as the sun goes down. We see all that and then it gets dark and we can look out all throughout and we can see the stars. And so we have this concept of an atmosphere around us, but we don't really see it. We don't really appreciate it. It's just there, but kind of see right through it. But we're talking about a world that has this canopy of water around it that has been separated so that the water that is all over the world has now been separated. And now there's this water, this world, and there's a gap of nothing, like sky, and then there's another canopy. And that seems like science fiction until you remember that here's Earth, and here's the sun, naturally, because it has hairs, and then here's a planet, and then here's another planet. What's this one? Mercury, very good, class. What's this one?
Venus.
This is Venus. What's crazy, wild science fiction about Venus is it has a canopy that completely surrounds it. It's not a canopy of water, it's a canopy of carbon dioxide, but it has this entire canopy that just sits over its atmosphere. Earth, at one time, according to the Genesis record, had the same thing, not of CO2, but of H2O, held in place by God. As Peter would say, the storehouses of them. Same idea of vault, expanse, holding, firmament, a storehouse of water placed there by God. For what purpose, God? I'll tell you in 5 chapters. Because I'm going to crack it like an egg and it's going to flood the earth again and bring it back to how it was in the beginning. To start over. Now, everything I just said is not universally agreed upon, but that's what I believe. So I'm the teacher. I'm moving on. Verse 7. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament for the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. Verse 8. See, we're flying now. And God called the firmament, my Bible says heaven, capital H. Your Bible say that?
Yes.
You have capital H?
Yes.
Okay, see, you ought not, I think. Because we exclusively hold on to that word heaven, and we make heaven like that is the realm of God. That is the throne of God. That is the place where God and his angels reside, etc., etc., etc. Okay, fine. The Jews had that word too. If they were speaking English, they call that heaven. But the ancient people had different things in mind when they used that word heaven. It's very versatile to them. So like we have sky, space, throne of God. Right? You have right directly above you, sky, birds fly, space, final frontier. Beyond that, beyond the material world, beyond the natural world, is the realm of God. So we have three distinct words, but the Jews have the first heaven, the second heaven, I once knew a man in God, he was called up to the third, Paul says about himself, we presume, heaven. Called up to the third heaven. He was called up to this distant, far away above us place. And that's really what the word heaven just meant, the above us place. So yeah, the birds fly above us, stars twinkle above us, God is enthroned above us, heaven. So all Moses means here is God created a separation of water from waters, and then that gap in between the waters and waters is what we now call the sky, or what the ancients here call heaven. And this all happened the evening and the morning were the second day. Again, you'll notice, and it'll be a refrain, evening and morning, evening first and morning, because as you probably know, the Jews regard the nighttime as the start of the new day, whereas we look at it like either midnight, which is very arbitrary, or it's like 6 a.m. whenever sunrise is our new day. Different to the Hebrews. Not touching that. Verse 9. And God said, I have books if you want them. Verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. So again, it would be swell if this was like a movie. We're trying to visualize. We're trying to use, in my case, 1611, translated and updated several times over, language taken from original ancient Hebrew. So it's hard sometimes, lose things in translation, syntax and so forth, what we're reading and how it's starting to make sense, try to grasp it. But what God says basically is, let's take the water and let's just move the water around. And so imagine like you have all this mountain landmass stuff that's there. It's just covered by the water. And God says, let's just move the water so that the water will rise, naturally. It's like if you're at the beach and the tide pulls out, suddenly there's a lot more beach, right? Something like that occurs. This, by the way, is the third utterance of creation. Let dry land appear, God says. How it appears? Let the waters that are under the heaven, that's these waters, from this water, let these waters move around and stuff so that, and I'm just drawing it because it's our reference point, okay? But there's the world, as we know. Like there's Canada, and there's Florida, and there's, South America, and over there is like Africa. It's very scientific. So, it wasn't. I'll bet you a barrel full of betches. It wasn't like that, but that's the idea. Okay, and then suddenly, let dry land appear. Verse 10. And God calls the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas. Again, a very generic term. We now exclusively have the word for seas separate from a word for lake or bog or ocean, but this is just the big bodies of water. It's just the word seas. And again, God says this is good. He's on a roll. Hasn't done a bad thing yet. Verse 11. And God said, let the earth, hang on. Let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. Let this be done upon the earth. And it was so. This is the fourth utterance of creation. Bring grass and herbs into the world. Today, apple trees grow because of apple seeds, which spring out of apple fruits. But where do the apple fruits come from? The child asks his mother. And the mother says, well, silly boy or girl, the apple seeds produce the apple trees, which make the apple fruits. Well, then where do the apple seeds come from? Well, those come from the apples. Where do the apples come from? From the apple trees. Keep up, kid. And they get in this cycle. They say, okay, well, where did the first apple tree come from? You're halfway to Genesis. That's the explanation. God says here, let these things produce fruit after their kind. No evolutionary change from one species to another. where a banana tree suddenly becomes a fruit or an apple tree or anything else. Are there banana trees? Is that a thing? Whatever they are. A peach tree becomes an apple tree. Whatever that I'm safe there. It's like that. It's peach produce peaches, apples produce apples, and so on and so forth. Verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass. The earth has no mind. But God takes the time to command the earth to do these things. Because it is not just God commanding the earth. This is a mystery to us in Genesis, but it is a mystery revealed in John 1. Because what John does, he says, you read... I'm so upset. Because this wasn't written down. I just had the spontaneous thought. I'll write it down. I'll preach to you next week. That's the second bell. You can go.